Claire Johnson was given exclusive use of the family home until our children graduated from high school, but the arrangement came at a steep cost to me. As part of the deal, Mr. Johnson, was required to cover both the mortgage and the utility bills. On top of that, she was awarded half the value of my business, and I was stuck with her vehicle payments as well. It was clear the court wasn't exactly concerned with fairness. Claire was also granted 60% of our financial assets, including our bank accounts, investments, and retirement funds. I barely even had a chance to fight it. Primary custody of our children was awarded to her, with visitation rights laid out in a predictable pattern, alternating weekends and 2 weeks during the summer. Child support was set at $750 per child, which brought the total to $1,500 every month. And since she hadn't worked in 5 years, the court tacked on $2,000 a month in spousal maintenance. Judge Rebecca Simmons ruled the divorce would be finalized in 90 days unless I withdrew my petition. When the gavel came down, it seemed like that was the end of it. But then, I said one word, just one, and it turned everything upside down. The look on Claire's face was priceless. She clearly wasn't used to being challenged in that courtroom. I even offered, sarcastically, to explain the word to her, just in case she had trouble with it. Her whole body froze. Her head snapped around so quickly I thought her neck might break. She stared at me as though I'd committed some unspeakable crime, something far worse than just speaking up. Her expression shifted from disbelief to pure, unfiltered rage as she returned to her seat. Her glare was so cold and cutting, it felt like it could freeze fire. "I know exactly what you're doing," she sneered. Then, in a frosty tone, she declared I had exactly 1 minute to apologize or face contempt charges. I didn't back down. I simply told her that citing me for contempt would probably be the most accurate ruling she'd made all day. I went on to express my utter disdain for the whole process, for the farce it had become. My lawyer, clearly panicking, began rifling through his briefcase in a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. I wasn't fazed. The judge slammed her gavel again, and in a voice dripping with venom, she threatened to see how much contempt I could muster after 30 days in jail. I smirked and suggested she double it, 60 days, maybe more. Why stop there? And then, because I couldn't leave well enough alone, I added, maybe if you got some physical affection every now and then, you'd be a little easier to deal with. To really drive my point home, I gave her the finger, both hands this time, and quipped that she could ride them to her heart's content. The judge's reaction was nothing short of explosive. Her face turned such a deep red, I thought she might burst. If there was ever a moment when someone should have called for an ambulance, it was then. She looked like she might literally explode. With a voice that could have come straight out of a horror movie, she sentenced me to 90 days in jail. The bailiffs quickly moved in to restrain me, while my lawyer looked like he might faint. The courtroom was dead silent, except for my uncontrollable laughter. The next day, I received a letter from my lawyer's firm informing me they were dropping me as a client. I guess I couldn't say I was surprised. I was stunned. So, you're probably wondering how things ended up like that. Well, let me back up a bit and give you some context. My name is Michael Johnson. I'm 31 years old, and I grew up in a typical middle-class family in the American heartland. My parents taught me the difference between right and wrong from an early age. Respect had to be earned, and your word was your bond. They instilled in me the importance of hard work, generosity, and standing by your values. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, was at the core of everything we did. But, let's be honest, not everyone takes the other side of that rule into account. Do unto others as they have done unto you. While the Christian ideal is to turn the other cheek, I've never been all that great at that. I've always had a stubborn streak. Some might even call it relentless. And when I feel like someone's wronged me, I don't just let it slide. I take action. Now, sometimes my methods aren't exactly conventional. Let me give you an example from high school. At the time, I was dating Jenna Carter. We'd been together a few months, and like most young couples, we had our fights. One of those arguments led to a brief breakup, just a cooling-off period. We both knew it would blow over in a few days, or at least I thought we both knew. That Saturday night, I happened to be walking by the local theater when I saw something that completely shocked me. there was my cousin Daniel, of all people, walking into the theater with Jenna. Now, Daniel wasn't just any cousin. He was more like a brother to me. We grew up together, lived on the same block, and had been inseparable since we were kids. He knew full well that Jenna and I were on a break and that we'd likely patch things up soon. But that night, he decided to cross a line. From that moment on, Daniel was dead to me. When Jenna tried to talk to me on Monday, I ignored her completely. Same with Daniel. On Sunday at church, he came over to talk to me, but I didn't say a word, just stared at him until he gave up. Later, at Sunday dinner, I made sure to completely shut him out. He even tried to play video games with me, but as soon as he picked up the controller, I put mine down and went to my room. Our parents tried to get us to reconcile, but I wasn't having it. A year later, when I started dating his ex-girlfriend, yeah, I stole her, I still refused to make peace. Daniel confronted me about it, and I punched him in the face. That was the extent of our interaction. Years later, when he sent me a wedding invite, I didn't even bother to respond. And when I got married to Claire, I made sure every other member of the extended family got an invite. Except for him. Okay, I know I'm not exactly a saint here. I'm the first to admit that I hold grudges. But here's the thing. I don't forgive people unless I'm convinced the mistake was genuinely unintentional. What Daniel and Jenna did wasn't a slip-up. It was deliberate. If you think I'm being unreasonable, well, buckle up, because I'm about to annoy you even more. I firmly believe that if you make a foolish decision, you should face the consequences. I call it the foolish tax. If you decide to drive drunk, for example, you should expect to lose your license, pay higher insurance, and probably do community service. If you have a job that relies on driving, you might lose that too. If you mess up, you pay the price. It's as simple as that. For instance, if a teenager gets pregnant because she didn't use protection, her tax is motherhood for the next 18 years. And the guy who got her pregnant, he needs to step up and share that responsibility. Actions have consequences. It's called personal responsibility. I worked my ass off to avoid paying someone else's foolish tax. Throughout high school, I focused on my grades, earned scholarships, and got into a good college. Sure, I had a healthy dating life, but I always kept my academics as my top priority. I was always on the more attractive side, and staying fit certainly helped. Yeah, I got into my share of fights in high school, mostly because I refused to back down when it came to defending my principles. I won more fights than I lost, and it kept me in great physical shape. A trait that definitely didn't go unnoticed by the women I dated. After earning a degree in economics with a minor in accounting, I went on to get my MBA. With a solid education behind me, I landed a great job at a large company where the pay was excellent. Being single and with few expenses, I figured it was the perfect time to try my hand at the stock market. Turns out I had a real knack for it. I saw some pretty impressive returns, and life seemed to be going my way. Then I met Claire at a party. We hit it off right away and I asked her out. She said yes, and things just naturally progressed from there. I have to admit, Claire was stunning. It's funny to think about now, but what guy doesn't think his girlfriend is the most beautiful woman in the room? The thing is, it wasn't just me who thought so. Every time we went out, she turned heads. My friends would joke about how they'd try to make a move if we ever broke up, and even my lesbian friends would tease about trying to convert her. Eventually, I proposed, and she said yes. We got married, and I'll point out that Claire had a degree in art history. Though I used to joke that she went to college for her MD, that's M for marriage degree. It's a playful term for women who go to college not so much for a career, but to find a husband who can take care of them. She didn't find me there, but the joke still stuck. After graduation, Claire worked as a Starbucks barista, an ironic fit for someone with a degree in art history. About a week before our wedding, she quit her job to embrace her new role as a homemaker. We settled into a comfortable life together in a cozy 3-bedroom house. Things were going well. I excelled at work, and my investments in the stock market paid off, allowing us to live comfortably while putting away a significant amount of money. All my bonuses went straight into investments, and I maxed out my Roth IRA contributions every year. I had my sights set on early retirement before I turned 40, if I played my cards right. My career was flourishing, too, with steady promotions and generous bonuses. A few years into our marriage, I came home one Friday evening to find Claire dressed to the nines, practically glowing with excitement. "Hurry up and shower, Daddy," she exclaimed. "We're going out to celebrate." I froze. Did she just call me Daddy? It hit me like a ton of bricks. After months of trying, we'd finally succeeded. She was pregnant. I swept her into my arms, spinning her around while kissing her face, already imagining the changes we'd make to our lives to accommodate the baby. We celebrated that night like we were on top of the world, knowing it would probably be one of the last wild nights for a while. The next few months were a whirlwind of preparations and excitement, until came the next big surprise. Claire wasn't just pregnant. She was carrying twins. 2 little girls. The thought of being a dad to twin daughters filled me with pride and joy. I couldn't wait to spoil them and let them wrap me around their little fingers. Life felt perfect. The day we rushed to the hospital finally arrived, and a few hours later, our beautiful twin daughters were born. They were perfect in every way, healthy, with all 10 fingers and 10 toes. Since they were twins, they had to stay in the hospital for a couple of extra days, but there were no complications. When it was time to bring them home, both sides of our families were there to welcome us. The house was buzzing with joy and excitement. I couldn't help but notice how my mom's eyes were glued to the twins. It was like she couldn't stop smiling. She'd been longing for grandchildren for so long, and I had finally made that dream come true for her. Life for Claire and me changed overnight. I started realizing that my corporate job was demanding far too much of my time. I decided it was time to prioritize my family. With the financial cushion I'd built through investments, I made a bold move and started my own company. Since I had already found success in the stock market and had been informally managing portfolios for friends and family, it seemed like a natural step. I obtained the necessary licenses to open my own investment firm, and many of the people I had been helping casually became my first official clients. Word of mouth spread fast, and even some of my former coworkers transferred their portfolios over to me. Within a year, my client base had grown rapidly, and more people were recommending me to their friends. Business was booming and life seemed perfect until, of course, it wasn't. When you're on top, there's usually only one direction to go, and it's down. The turning point came at the twins' second birthday party. Claire and I went all out for the celebration. Even though the girls wouldn't remember it, we knew they'd enjoy watching the videos when they were older. Family from both sides gathered, and everything seemed to be going perfectly, until I overheard a conversation that would shatter my world. I had just used the private bathroom in our bedroom, since the hall bathroom was occupied, and as I was heading back to join the party, I heard my mom talking to her sister in the hallway. What they were saying hit me like a freight train. My mom said, "I still can't figure out where those blue eyes come from." Aunt Monica Stevens, her sister, suggested, "Maybe you should ask Michael about it." To which my mom replied, "I don't even want to think about what would happen if he found out they're not his. He's so happy. It would destroy him." Those words, they were like a dagger to my heart. I froze, unable to move. I quietly backed away and locked myself in the bathroom, my mind racing. They had to be mine, right? I tried desperately to recall if anyone in either of our families had blue eyes. My eyes were brown and Claire's were hazel, or so I thought. Going through a mental catalog of relatives, the only person I could think of with non-brown eyes was my cousin Olivia Clark, who had green eyes thanks to her stepdad's side of the family. But on Claire's side, no one came to mind with blue eyes. I stayed in the bathroom for a while, trying to steady myself. Eventually, I realized I couldn't stay locked away forever. I had to return to the party, act normal, and not raise suspicion. So, for the rest of the day, I played the role of the happy father. But inside, my thoughts were consumed with what I just overheard. Later that evening, after everyone left and the twins were finally asleep, I studied their features closely. Some traits looked like Claire's, but nothing seemed to definitively connect them to me. The doubts in my mind grew, and the question that had been gnawing at me ever since that moment in the hallway became louder and clearer. Were they really mine? The next day, while Claire napped with the girls, I discreetly ordered DNA testing kits to be sent to my office. I needed to keep everything private. At the same time, I started researching private investigators, my suspicion about Claire's infidelity growing stronger by the hour. If she had cheated back then, Was it still going on now? I had to know the truth. Within a few days, the testing kits arrived. I didn't waste any time. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigation firm, Silverstone Investigations, to look into Claire's activities. They specialized in accessing phones, tablets, and laptops, so I handed over all the information they needed. On the financial side, I began making moves to protect my assets. If the girls were mine and Claire hadn't been cheating, no harm would be done. But if my worst fears were confirmed, I wouldn't continue funding her betrayal or supporting children that weren't mine. As much as I felt for the girls, I had to think about myself too. 2 weeks later, the results came back. I locked my office door and opened the envelope with trembling hands. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. The girls weren't mine. Deep down, I had suspected it, but seeing it in writing was another thing altogether. It broke me. I sat there, in my office, and cried for what felt like an hour. The next day, the private investigator met with me. He handed over the evidence he had gathered. Not only had Claire cheated on me back then, but she was still seeing the same man, their blue-eyed, blonde-haired personal trainer. They met a couple of times a week, and she even took the girls to his apartment. The audio recordings I had from the private investigator revealed something I couldn't deny. They both knew he was the biological father. The following afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with a divorce lawyer. The moment he started talking about prioritizing the children's well-being, I shut him down. I wasn't interested in the usual advice. I told him to prepare the paperwork, but to hold off on filing until I decided the right moment had come. Over the next couple of months, I quietly moved assets around, ensuring I had no liquid net worth on paper. Claire would get nothing beyond what the court would require. Then, the day I'd been preparing for arrived. That weekend, my cousin Daniel, yes, the same one who had betrayed me years ago, and his wife Jenna came over. Claire was confused, especially when I told her they'd visited me at my office a couple of weeks earlier. What I said next completely changed the course of everything. I'd love to tell you that my cousin Daniel and his wife Jenna showed up at my office purely out of the goodness of their hearts, hoping to mend fences after all these years of bad blood. And yes, they did visit me and they apologized profusely, acknowledging the mistakes they had made. I accepted their apologies, that part is absolutely true. I told them I forgave them, and we shook hands, finally putting the old grudges to rest. But let's not get carried away with sentimentality. There are some details I've conveniently left out, details that fill in the blanks, and I'm about to tell you exactly what those are. You see, Jenna's family wasn't exactly full of upstanding citizens. Some of her relatives were the kind of people who looked like they'd been born to intimidate others. Big, rough types who didn't mind throwing fists in bar brawls or bending a few laws when it suited them. There was even some local gossip, though nothing that could be confirmed, that a few of them worked as enforcers for shady businessmen in town. Whether or not that was true didn't matter. The point was, these were people you didn't want to cross. Now, here's the twist. Just days before Daniel and Jenna came to my office, the local news reported a brutal mugging outside a gym. A personal trainer had been ambushed by 5 masked men as he was leaving work. According to the report, they didn't just rob him, they completely destroyed him. They stripped him of his wallet and clothes, then beat him so badly that he ended up in a terrible state. Doctors said he'd recover physically, but his chances of fathering children again were slim to none. As if that weren't enough, they stole his car and dismantled it at a chop shop, maxed out his credit cards, emptied his bank accounts, and sold his identity on the dark web. He was looking at years of legal and financial nightmares. Now, here's where life throws a strange coincidence my way. The victim was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed personal trainer at Claire's gym. Life sure does have a way of throwing these odd little coincidences at you, doesn't it? I couldn't help but notice that Claire was acting unusually down the week of the attack. She moped around the house, barely saying a word. I even suggested we upgrade our home security, given the rising crime rates, but she just waved me off. She was clearly rattled, though she refused to explain why. By Monday, her mood hadn't improved, but I had bigger things to focus on. It was time to finalize my plans. That morning, I called my lawyer and told him to move forward with filing the divorce paperwork. We scheduled Claire to be served on Friday. My lawyer, always the voice of reason, tried once again to talk me into reconsidering some of the terms, but I was firm. Claire could have the house and the investments, but I wasn't going to pay her a cent more. If she wanted the house, she'd have to take on the mortgage and the utility bills herself. As for the investments, there hadn't been anything in those accounts for weeks. Giving her 100% of nothing wasn't exactly going to hurt my feelings. The next few days were spent making my final preparations. For weeks, I'd been quietly moving my belongings out of the house, one piece at a time. My tools and larger items were already stored at Ryan and Jenna's ranch, while smaller possessions were tucked away in a one-bedroom apartment I'd rented. The apartment was owned by an LLC with offshore connections, making it nearly impossible to trace back to me. Claire wouldn't have a clue until it was far too late. Finally, Friday arrived. That morning, I left for work as usual, but instead of parking my car, I met Ryan. He helped me move my truck, leaving my car at the office. I took the truck to the bank, withdrew everything from every account, leaving only a token $100 in checking and savings. I also emptied the safety deposit box, combining its contents with the cash I had already stashed away. I wasn't about to risk a new box being traced or a wire transfer raising any red flags. Now, you might wonder why I trusted Ryan and Jenna, given our history. The answer is simple: leverage. The mortgage on their ranch was held by that same offshore LLC, and they knew better than to bite the hand that fed them. Despite everything that had happened, Ryan was still family, and in our family, loyalty runs deep. Betrayal is a line you just don't cross unless you're prepared to deal with the consequences. For Ryan and Jenna, helping me wasn't just about making amends. It was about securing their own future. After finishing my errands, I headed back home late that morning, parking a few blocks away. I used the GPS tracker I had installed on Claire's car to confirm her location. She was at the mall, just as I expected. Perfect. I hurried home, parked in the driveway, and started loading the last of my belongings into the truck. Most of my things had already been packed and were waiting in the garage, so it didn't take long to grab the remaining clothes from the closet and dresser. I didn't bother folding or organizing them. I just grabbed armfuls, hangers and all, and tossed them into the cab. Within minutes, the house was stripped of anything I cared about. I didn't even bother locking the doors or closing the garage. As I drove away, halfway down the street, my phone rang. It was Claire. I didn't answer. I figured she'd realized her cards weren't working. Watching the GPS tracker, I saw her car heading straight for the house. I couldn't help but laugh. Tossing my phone onto the passenger seat, I kept driving. By the time Claire arrived, I was already long gone. I pulled up to my new apartment, unloaded everything, and started setting up my new life. It didn't take long to get everything in place, and a few beers later, I was finally able to relax in my recliner. Then my new phone rang. I picked up immediately. Only a handful of people had this number, and Claire definitely wasn't one of them. The voice on the other end informed me that she had been served, and assured me that the video was on its way. "Thanks," I said, then hung up. 15 minutes later, the video landed in my email. I opened it and watched as Claire's expression shifted from confusion to shock. Shock doesn't even begin to cover her reaction. For a moment, I thought about saving the video to watch later, but I didn't bother. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, finished my beer, and just soaked in the feeling of freedom. The video was brief, too brief for my liking. It only captured the moment she collapsed to the floor after being handed the divorce papers. The process server, as professional as ever, checked to make sure she wasn't hurt and then calmly walked away. That was it. I would have given anything to have been there in person to witness what happened next. When she started reading the divorce petition, saw the DNA results, and watched the video evidence of her infidelity. That was the reaction I wanted to see. But for now, I had to settle for the video. From there, things slowed to a crawl. Calls started flooding into my old office. Claire had clearly gone into panic mode, desperately trying to reach me. But when she was told I had resigned 2 weeks earlier, that was the first sign she realized something was terribly wrong. Claire refused to believe what was happening. She insisted on speaking to me directly. Her frustration quickly turned into desperation, and soon, She showed up at my workplace, demanding answers. It didn't end well. Security was called, and when her shouting became disruptive, the police had to escort her off the premises. Ryan wasn't spared either. Claire must have suspected his involvement in my sudden decision to file for divorce. She bombarded him with calls, trying to pry information out of him. Ryan handled it efficiently, making a few key calls and ensuring that restraining orders were filed for both himself and my former workplace. That put an end to her harassment, though I could imagine it only added to her growing stress. Her world was crumbling, and she didn't even know the half of it. 2 weeks later, my lawyer reached out to Claire's to confirm her legal representation. She didn't have one yet. With her money running out fast, Claire had no choice but to lean heavily on her parents for support. Meanwhile, I enjoyed a rare stretch of calm, free from any immediate obligations. All my preparations were complete, and I made sure there was nothing left for her to exploit. Eventually, Claire hired a lawyer, and meetings were scheduled. Predictably, I refused to attend in person. I'd made it clear to my lawyer. Not a penny more. The negotiations went exactly as I expected, badly. Tempers flared on both sides, and soon, arbitration was required. Reluctantly, I attended. It didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. Claire wasted no time launching into her accusations. "Where's all the money, you idiot?" She spat across the table. Confused, I asked, "What money?" "All our money," she snapped. "We're flat broke." I sighed theatrically, leaning back in my chair. "I'm living in a cheap, single-bedroom apartment," I said. "All the investments vanished in a catastrophic gamble. An investment in a cheating wife." It wasn't exactly a lie. The accounts were empty as far as anyone could see. What Claire didn't know was that the funds had been carefully and meticulously moved into offshore accounts, untraceable and completely out of her reach. I didn't bother to elaborate on that. Claire's lawyer argued for access to assets that no longer existed, while mine made what seemed like a generous offer. The house, with her name as the sole owner on the title. "The mortgage is maxed out," she shouted. "I can't afford the payments." "That's not my problem," I said coldly. "Child support?" she demanded. I pointed out firmly that the DNA results made it clear the children weren't mine. "Spousal maintenance?" she continued, her voice rising in desperation. "No job, no income, no alimony," I responded flatly. She demanded a percentage of the liquid assets. I reminded her that there were none. "Good luck with that," I said. As for the business, I told her there was nothing left there either. The arbitration failed spectacularly. The next step was court, where I found myself standing before Judge Rebecca Simmons, a notoriously tough hardliner with a reputation for being especially harsh on men, particularly in cases involving infidelity. I knew the deck was stacked against me. Criticize my tactics if you want, but I wasn't careless. I had anticipated the court's scrutiny, particularly when it came to the account records. I'd spent weeks carefully moving money through various banks and accounts, withdrawing cash in small amounts and depositing it under different names. Jenna's family had been instrumental in helping me navigate the legal gray areas. One of their side businesses, a gag gift shop, specialized in novelty fake IDs. For a small fee, they'd even omit the "for entertainment purposes only" disclaimer. While I didn't rely on the IDs for serious matters, the principle was the same. They were experts at making things disappear. 60 days into my 90-day county jail sentence, I was back in Judge Simmons's courtroom. She fixed me with a glare that could have melted steel. "Well," she sneered, "have you learned your lesson yet about marrying a cheating spouse?" I replied, keeping my tone cool. "Yes, I learned that long before your courtroom." Her face darkened. Judge Simmons's face darkened as she leaned forward. "I meant your attitude in court," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. I smirked. "My attitude? No complaints here, Your Honor. But I do worry about your blood pressure." Her jaw tightened, and the vein in her forehead pulsed dangerously. "I could extend your sentence by 30 days, she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Take it easy, Your Honor," I replied, my tone casual as ever. I'd hate for your bench to catch fire from all the flames you're snorting. Her glare could have melted steel. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a perverse sense of satisfaction. Whatever came next, I wasn't about to let her or anyone else get the last word. I was beginning to suspect Judge Simmons didn't like me very much. I mean, here I was sitting in jail, cut off from any access to money, and somehow still being berated for not paying support to a cheating ex-wife. Irony of ironies, it was her decision that had put me here in the first place. So I decided to remind her of that. Maybe you'd like to explain why your own ruling is preventing the funds you claim I owe from ever reaching Claire, or that other fallen woman she's been funneling money to. I paused, then added with a sarcastic edge, do I need to explain it more slowly for you? Unsurprisingly, my remark didn't go over well. Before I could say another word, I was swiftly escorted back to my cell and handed another 90 days to serve. 30 days for the original sentence, 30 more for her earlier fit of rage, and now another 30 for my latest courtroom antics. Honestly, though, it wasn't as bad as you might think. Sure, the food wasn't great, but it was edible. I had a bed to sleep in, plenty of time to relax, and access to exercise equipment. I made good use of the weights and machines, staying in excellent shape. Word of my courtroom shenanigans spread quickly through the jail, earning me some unexpected popularity. It didn't hurt that Jenna's family had a few connections that made my stay relatively smooth. Let's just say that people who might have considered giving me trouble thought twice when they realized who my extended family was. There was only one real issue, and it came in the form of Claire's less-than-brilliant cousin. This genius decided that he was going to teach me a lesson. His plan? Get arrested on a minor charge, spend a week in jail, and show me who's boss. Unfortunately for him, the entire jail population seemed to recognize him the moment he stepped inside. His plan was so obvious it was laughable, and it didn't take much effort to thwart it. The first incident happened in the yard. A football came flying at him, coincidentally, of course, and struck him square in the stomach, sending him sprawling to the ground. The offender, a huge guy who was clearly trying to avoid getting into trouble, apologized profusely. A few moments later, as Cousin Idiot made his way toward me, a basketball, again coincidentally, came flying out of nowhere and smacked him right in the face. Another apology, of course. At this point, he should have gotten the message, but no. He kept pushing forward, oblivious to the fact that the entire yard had seen through his pathetic little scheme. When someone accidentally elbowed him while helping him up, I think even he started to question his life choices. But no, he still came at me. So when he finally reached me, he attempted a poorly executed sucker punch. Big mistake. I was ready. I spun around and delivered a kick to his groin that would have made a pro kicker proud. If it had been a football, it would have cleared 65 yards. That was the last straw for him. He spent the next 2 days in the infirmary, and the rest of his week hiding in his cell, avoiding the yard altogether until his release. Back in court, Judge Simmons was itching for an apology. "Are you ready to say you're sorry, Mr. Johnson?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain. "For what exactly?" I replied innocently, genuinely confused. "For your vile outburst in my courtroom," she snapped, her frustration evident. I looked at her with mock confusion. "I really don't know what you're talking about," I said, making sure to draw out each word with deliberate care. Her frustration reached a boiling point. "Watch your tone, Mr. Johnson," she warned, "or I'll extend your sentence again." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Let her play her little games. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I sighed dramatically, putting on my best act of exaggerated patience. "Perhaps another judge might take over soon, Your Honor," I said, eyeing her carefully. "You seem to be on the verge of a stroke. Maybe I should start stomping my feet to see if an EMT is necessary?" Her face turned an alarming shade of red, but before she could respond, I moved on to the more pressing matters at hand. I leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her as I pointed out, "No child support, no maintenance, no mortgage payments, no utility payments. Not because I'm unwilling, Your Honor, but because I'm physically unable to comply. I'm in jail, remember? I can't work, I have no income, and I have no access to money. The children aren't mine, and my ex-wife cheated on me. Maybe she should charge people for her lifestyle instead of expecting me to pay for it. Claire's lawyer, clearly desperate, shot up in his seat and interjected with a new revelation. He explained, almost with a sense of triumph, despite the court's order, Mrs. Johnson hasn't been able to claim her share of Mr. Johnson's business. Mr. Johnson sold the company to an overseas entity 2 months before filing for divorce. We've been unable to determine the actual owners or enforce the order. As if on cue, an attractive woman in a sharp suit stood up, walking toward the table with a quiet confidence. She introduced herself as a representative of the board of directors for the firm that had purchased my business. She held her ground as she addressed the court. The court's order granting Mrs. Johnson a share of the company is invalid. The sale occurred before the divorce proceedings began, and as such, this business has no connection to Mrs. Johnson or the marriage. Any claims of ownership are baseless. The judge turned to her, her eyebrows raised in interest. "What about the money from the sale?" she asked, clearly hoping to dig deeper. The woman remained poised. "The transfer of ownership and payments was conducted overseas," she replied smoothly. "To my knowledge, those funds never entered U.S. jurisdiction. Any claim to those funds would need to be pursued with Mr. Johnson in the country where the money is currently held." Claire's lawyer pressed harder, clearly thrown off balance by this new revelation. "In which country would that be?" The woman didn't flinch. "Initially, the funds were transferred to Belgium," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "After that, they were moved again, but I'm not privy to where." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of the implications sinking in. Claire's lawyer, visibly agitated, continued to argue. "Mrs. Johnson is struggling financially. The house is in foreclosure after 3 months of missed mortgage payments, and the utilities are on the brink of being cut off. She's been forced to find work as a waitress at a local diner, but her income isn't enough to cover the house. Her parents have been helping her, but they're stretched thin." The judge turned her attention back to me, clearly trying to maintain control of the situation. "You have 1 week to bring all payments up to date," she ordered, her voice firm. Couldn't resist. "What would you like me to do, Your Honor?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Bend over and pull cash out of my crack? I'm in jail. I can't work. I don't have access to money. There's no cash here, and no way for me to comply." Her glare could have cut through steel, but I met it with a calm expression, silently daring her to try adding more time to my sentence. After all, what more could she do to me now? I leaned back, the absurdity of it all suddenly too much to bear. "Let's talk about the sheer absurdity of the court's belief that I have money lying around in my jail cell, just waiting to be sent out," I continued. "I can't even get to my financial records, let alone retrieve any of these supposed phantom accounts you keep mentioning, which, by the way, don't exist. So why don't you just show me these accounts, or tell me where the money went from our checking accounts, savings accounts, and investments?" The room was still, every eye on me. I could feel the skepticism from the bench, but I shrugged it off. "Believe me or don't," I said flatly, my tone dismissive. "If you think I've hidden money, feel free to show me where it is." Claire's lawyer shot up, objecting. "These claims are preposterous," he shouted, the vein in his neck straining. I gave him a bored look. "Tell me something I don't know," I muttered. The judge glared at me but didn't respond. She seemed as frustrated with the situation as I was, but I wasn't about to make this any easier for her. Couldn't help but smirk. "It makes just as much sense as keeping me locked up in jail, unable to access money, and then demanding I make payments. Could someone please explain that logic to me?" The judge's eyes narrowed with irritation. "Do you realize, Mr. Johnson, that I can keep you in jail indefinitely until you pay?" I raised an eyebrow and gave her an incredulous look, as if she'd just sprouted a third eye. "Oh, sure," I said, my voice oozing with sarcasm. "Keep me here where I can't earn a dime, and then expect me to pay? Brilliant strategy." Over the next few months, the inevitable happened. Claire's house went into foreclosure, her Lexus was repossessed for missed payments, and, unable to afford a place of her own, she moved in with her parents. She took a part-time job at a diner, but with only 30 hours a week, she couldn't even cover basic expenses. It didn't take long before desperation crept into her lawyer's voice, and he petitioned the court to have me released so I could find employment and start making payments. Meanwhile, Claire's lover, the personal trainer, had recovered enough from his injuries to return to work, but his financial situation was no better. With his credit destroyed and a mountain of medical bills, he was scrambling to stay afloat. It seemed karma was having its way. Eventually, I reached an agreement with the court. In exchange for my release, I agreed to find a job and start making payments. I surrendered my passport, citing the judge's concerns about hidden assets and my potential to flee. Once that was settled, I took a job at Taco Bell and moved into Ryan and Jenna's ranch. Though I was under surveillance, I didn't mind. Most of my cash was already safely stashed away. For the next 3 months, I kept a low profile. Claire, predictably, went after my wages from Taco Bell, garnishing them through a court order. But the amount she managed to extract was laughable. During this time, I finalized my plans. Ryan had already cleared out my apartment while I was in jail, distributing my belongings among our extended family. Packages were discreetly shipped to various locations, and during casual family gatherings, my relatives quietly loaded the items into their cars. The surveillance didn't pick up on any of it. I stayed home when I wasn't at work, doing my best to keep things under the radar. At one point, Claire began showing up at Taco Bell, causing enough disruption that the restaurant had to file a restraining order against her just to keep me employed. To make sure the manager didn't get cold feet, I discreetly paid him off. No drama, no problem. My legal situation also shifted. The lawyer who had represented the new owners of my former company eventually became my personal attorney. She was sharp, aggressive, and had a no-nonsense attitude that suited me just fine. We had several meetings at the ranch, and let's just say she didn't have much of a moral compass when it came to bending the rules. When someone once questioned the appropriateness of our lawyer-client relationship, I quipped, "Scruples are a form of currency in Russia, and morals are just wall decor." As for my finances, yes, I sold my company. No, I didn't sell it to myself. I wasn't going to give Claire any ammunition to claim a piece of it. The sale took place overseas, and the funds never entered U.S. jurisdiction, which made them untouchable by U.S. courts. The only way Claire could access the money was if I brought it into a domestic bank, which I had no intention of doing. The sale netted me a significant sum, which, along with my other investments, put me in the ballpark of $10 million. In addition, I had about $2,000 in liquid cash, spread across safety deposit boxes, hidden safes, and a few other places. None of it was accessible to Claire. By the time Claire realized just how deep in the hole she was, it was too late. The house was gone, the utilities had been shut off, and her parents were bearing most of the burden. Meanwhile, I was living rent-free at the ranch, working a no-pressure job, and laying the groundwork for my next move. The court could keep demanding payments all it wanted, but with nothing left for them to seize, the only thing they could do was keep yelling, and I'd gotten really good at ignoring that. Some of the money had gone into setting up my exit, but I still had about $150,000 left on hand. I didn't plan on taking it with me. It was more useful staying behind as part of my exit plan. One Saturday afternoon, we held another barbecue at Ryan and Jenna's ranch, inviting the extended family. It was a hit. I worked alongside Ryan at the grill while mingling with the guests. Jennifer, my sharp-as-a-tack lawyer, was there too, blending in effortlessly. Later, one of Jenna's uncles approached me, thanking me for helping Ryan and Jenna get back on their feet. After a brief chat, he handed me an envelope, which I discreetly passed to Jennifer for safekeeping. That evening, I made an announcement. The lien on the ranch had been cleared, and Ryan and Jenna now owned their property outright. The crowd erupted into cheers, and the party carried on well into the night. As the guests gradually began leaving, Jennifer excused herself, explaining she had an early flight. She left with a convoy of vehicles, her car packed and ready to go. The next morning, Jennifer drove to an airport in a neighboring state and parked in a garage. No one noticed the man climbing out of the back of her car or following her casually into the terminal. Michael Johnson couldn't travel abroad, but Chris Taylor's passport was clean as a whistle. The two boarded a first-class flight to Mexico City, holding hands as though they'd always been together. By the time they reached Ecuador, Jennifer Davis had disappeared, replaced by Kate Taylor. 2 days later, Ryan and Lily Jordan arrived at a hacienda on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica. An old Chevy pickup, eerily similar to the one missing from Ryan and Jenna's ranch, was waiting for them there. 2 weeks after the barbecue, a bench warrant was issued for Michael Johnson. Taco Bell fired me shortly thereafter for a no-call, no-show. No payments had been made to Claire, and Ryan and Jenna were dragged into court. But their lawyer successfully distanced them from me, arguing that I had simply been a tenant who disappeared. They even filed a claim for back rent. While no one believed them, there was no proof otherwise, and the matter quickly fizzled out. Meanwhile, Ryan and Lily thrived in Costa Rica. Ryan ran a small charter fishing business, and Lily managed their cantina. They lived in a sprawling hacienda, hosting occasional visits from family like Daniel and Jenna. They were well-loved in their small village, donating generously and helping locals with financial advice. Ryan even set up investment accounts for them, sharing his expertise and bettering the lives of those around them. As for Judge Rebecca Simmons, karma didn't miss her. A few years after my escape, I learned that her wife, an infamous manhunter, had cheated with another man. The judge had adopted her wife's 3 children, and after the divorce, was stuck paying child support, maintenance, and the mortgage on the house. To add insult to injury, her ex-wife's boyfriend had moved in immediately. Rumor had it that they planned to marry once the youngest child finished college, which just happened to coincide with the judge's financial obligations finally ending. Meanwhile, Ryan and Lily lived their best life in Costa Rica. Their past was nothing more than an occasional punchline during cantina cocktails. Free from old burdens, they found happiness in simplicity and in each other.